My name is Margaret Dawson. I'm 62 years old, a retired art teacher who now spends her days painting quiet lakes and reading novels in a small house tucked into the woods of northern Wisconsin. My husband, Henry, passed away 6 years ago. Since then, my world has grown smaller. Fewer phone calls, fewer visits. But I've managed. I've told myself that solitude can be a choice, too. My son, Brandon Carter, is my only child. I raised him with more love than sense sometimes. I gave him the last piece of cake, the warmer coat, the front seat of life. I didn't think I was giving him permission to forget me. When Brandon called to tell me he was getting married to Melissa, I expected excitement, stories, questions. What do you think of this? Could you help with that? But all I got was a quick run down the date, the venue, the style. Come if you can, he said, like it was optional, like I was optional. Still, I prepared like it was the most important day of my life. I sewed myself a soft blue dress the color Brandon once said made me look like the morning sky. I ironed every seam, pressed every fold. I baked lemon cookies, the ones he used to sneak out of the jar when he was 8. I told myself this was a chance to stand where I belonged. The wedding was held at a lakefront hotel, modern and elegant. When I arrived, a young woman at the front desk handed me a name tag. It said only, Margaret. No title, no ribbon, no mother of the groom. I paused, my thumb running across the smooth sticker, then clipped it on anyway. Inside the hall, people gathered in glowing clusters. Melissa's family was everywhere laughing, hugging, taking pictures. Brandon stood near the front, looking comfortable in a world I no longer seemed to fit into. When a coordinator approached me, she smiled as if I was just another guest and pointed me to a table near the exit. I sat quietly at table 14 among strangers, a man who sold irrigation systems and a woman who ran a cat rescue in another state. They were kind, but they didn't know me. They didn't know Brandon. They didn't know I used to sing him to sleep, that I once stayed up all night sewing his Halloween costume. When the speeches came, Melissa's father spoke, then her sister, then her childhood friend. No one called my name. Someone asked if the groom's mother would like to say a few words. Melissa laughed and waved it off. Maybe later, she said. Later never came. Brandon never came to my table. Not for a hug, not even for a glance. I folded my napkin slowly, slipped it under my untouched glass, and left before the music faded. No one noticed. No one stopped me. That was the night I realized I was no longer part of the story. I had been written out. I left the wedding carrying nothing but silence. It stayed with me in the car, on the drive home, and settled into the corners of my house like dust I could never quite sweep away. Days passed, but the weight did not. Then, a week later, Brandon called. His voice was lighter this time, more deliberate. He said he wanted to have me over for dinner. Just us. I want you to feel welcome, he said, like an afterthought. I told him I'd come. I didn't ask questions. That afternoon, I baked butter cookies, the ones he used to devour by the dozen when he was a boy. I wrapped them carefully, tying a blue ribbon around the box. I wore a soft gray sweater and simple earrings. I wanted to believe this invitation was a step towards something better. Maybe an apology. Maybe a quiet attempt to mend something frayed. I told myself to stay open. His house was modern, neat, and sharp around the edges. Brick walls, trimmed hedges, a doorbell camera that blinked as I approached. When Brandon opened the door, his smile was quick, his hug brief, more of a polite tap on the shoulders than an embrace. Dinner's ready, he said, leading me inside. The house smelled clean, too clean. No trace of garlic, no bubbling pots, just a faint scent of air freshener and something that didn't quite belong. The dining table was set for 2, but instead of plates of food, there was a stack of papers carefully arranged in the center. A pen rested neatly on top. He gestured for me to sit. I placed the cookies on the sideboard, untouched. Brandon poured me a glass of water and sat across from me, his smile tight, rehearsed. "I've been thinking a lot about the future," he began, his voice sliding into the careful tone people use when they've practiced their words. "You're not getting any younger, Mom, and I just want to make sure things are in order. You know, just in case something happens." He tapped the stack of papers lightly, his fingers lingering on the pen. "This would make everything smoother. It's standard. A lot of families do this. It's really just for peace of mind." I picked up the top page: durable power of attorney, immediate authority, complete financial access, real estate management, no expiration. It didn't say mother. It didn't say family. It said principal. It said agent. It said control. I flipped through the rest slowly, my heartbeat steady, my hands calm. Brandon leaned forward, as if trying to guide me toward the signature line without saying it out loud. "This would just simplify things," he said. "I could take care of the paperwork, the bills, the house. You wouldn't have to worry about a thing." I looked up at him, searching his face for something I might still recognize. I wanted to see the boy who once cried when I left his kindergarten classroom. I wanted to see the child who used to grip my hand too tightly when he was scared. But I didn't see that boy anymore. I saw a man who had already decided what part I should play next. A quiet signature, a simple handoff, a logistical step. "You always told me I was good at managing things," he added, a thin thread of pride in his voice. "Let me do this for you." I nodded slowly. "Of course. Brandon, I just need a little time to read through everything carefully. I want to understand it fully." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Sure. Take your time. But it would be good to get it signed soon. These things can get complicated if we wait." There it was, the soft push, the clock ticking quietly in the background. We spent the rest of the evening in shallow conversation. He asked about the weather, the garden I no longer tended, a television show I hadn't seen. His eyes drifted back to the papers every few minutes. The cookies I brought stayed unopened on the sideboard. When I stood to leave, he hugged me again, lighter than before, like I was a person made of glass or perhaps something already gone. He thanked me for coming, his voice measured, distant. Driving home, I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't need noise. The silence had become its own language. When I got back to my house, I placed the stack of papers on the kitchen table. I didn't open them again that night. I didn't need to. I already understood what they asked of me. They weren't about trust. They weren't about love. They were about convenience, about access, about doors he wanted to walk through without asking. And in that moment, sitting at my quiet table under the dim kitchen light, I realized something painful and sharp. I was no longer his mother in the way I used to be. I had become a pathway, a name on a form. He hadn't invited me to dinner. He had invited me to surrender. I stared at the stack of papers on my kitchen table long after I got home, but I never reached for them again. I didn't need to. The words were already carved into me. Brandon's invitation had not been for dinner. It had been a quiet, calculated handover of my life. That night, I couldn't sleep. I moved from room to room, touching the edges of furniture, brushing my fingers along picture frames, passing Henry's old armchair as if it could offer me something, a sign, a direction, a comfort I could no longer name. I found myself outside before sunrise, standing in the cold grass behind the house. The sky was still dark, the ground damp beneath my slippers. My gaze drifted toward the small storage shed at the back of the yard, half forgotten and always a little crooked, leaning into the wind as if it had grown tired of standing straight. Henry used to keep his tools there, old garden supplies, rusted screws in glass jars. I hadn't been inside since the spring after he died, but I remembered now his quiet instruction, said offhandedly one morning when he was fixing the fence. "If something ever happens, you'll find what you need back there." At the time, I thought he meant a wrench or some spare nails. The door creaked as I pushed it open. Dust and cobwebs welcomed me like old companions. I scanned the shelves, the boxes, the forgotten coats. In the corner, tucked behind a broken rake and a stack of newspapers, I saw a small wooden chest, Henry's initials carved faintly on top. My hands trembled as I pulled it free. It was lighter than I expected. Inside was a metal lockbox, simple and unassuming, and beneath it, a small yellowed envelope with my name in his handwriting. My breath caught as I picked it up, the weight of his words pressing against my palms even before I unfolded the paper. His handwriting was steady, familiar. Margaret, if you're reading this, it means you needed to. I always knew you wouldn't ask for help, not even from me. I've made sure you'll never be left without choices, not dependent, not trapped. I set this up because I trust you to know when to use it. I didn't tell Brandon. Not because I didn't love him, but because I've seen what money does. It doesn't change people, it shows them. I sat down on the shed's wooden floor, my legs folded awkwardly beneath me, the cold seeping through my skin. With shaking fingers, I unlocked the metal box. Inside, everything was meticulously organized. Henry's care was in every detailed documents, account summaries, passwords, all carefully labeled. There were investment portfolios I never knew existed, mutual funds, a property in Oregon I'd never heard him mention. The total balance stared back at me in bold, unforgiving ink, $8 million. I read the number twice. It didn't feel real. It didn't feel like relief, either. It felt like the quiet answer to a question I hadn't dared to ask. Henry had seen what I hadn't. He had seen what Brandon might become. In the corner of the box was another folded sheet, listing specific instructions how to move the assets if I ever needed to protect them, how to establish independent trusts, how to keep control in my own name, under layers no one could easily reach. He had built me a fortress I never knew I would need. Tears didn't come. What settled over me was something heavier, a dense, aching awareness that Henry had left me the one thing Brandon now sought to take, not just the money, but the right to decide my own life. I don't know how long I sat there. The wooden floor was rough beneath my palms, the cold settling into my spine. When I finally stood, I locked the box again, tucked it under my arm, and made my way back to the house. I placed it carefully in the cabinet beneath the sink, behind a stack of old pans no one would bother to touch. That evening, I prepared a simple dinner for myself, roasted vegetables, a piece of fish, a small glass of wine. I sat at the kitchen table alone, the stack of Brandon's papers still untouched, and realized I wasn't angry. I wasn't even surprised. What I felt was the quiet shift of something inside me, like a door I had never dared to close was slowly swinging shut. Brandon didn't need me. Not really. He needed what I could offer. He needed what he believed was rightfully his. But Henry had left me something Brandon didn't know I had. Henry had left me choice. I spent the next few days moving in a quiet rhythm, cooking simple meals, watering the plants, folding the same blanket on the edge of the couch. But beneath that surface, something inside me had shifted permanently. I could no longer pretend I was standing on familiar ground. Brandon hadn't just asked me to trust him, he had assumed I would surrender. I didn't plan my next step out of anger. I planned it because Henry had left me the tools, and it was time I learned how to use them. I remembered someone from long ago, Charlotte Wells, an old friend who used to handle complex family estate disputes before she retired. We had lost touch after Henry passed, but her words had stayed with me. The quietest women often leave the sharpest signatures. I found her number scribbled on the back of a recipe card tucked in my kitchen drawer, almost as if I had always known I would need it one day. When I called, she answered on the second ring. Her voice was slower than I remembered, but steady, direct. I told her what was happening. She didn't offer pity. She offered coffee. The next afternoon, I sat across from her at her small kitchen table, the scent of cinnamon and old wood settling around us like a second conversation. I handed her Henry's documents. Every folder, every account, every instruction he had prepared. She read through them without speaking, her finger tracing the edges of each page. When she finally looked up, her eyes were sharp. "You have more power than you realize," she said, "but only if you decide to keep it." I nodded slowly. I want to protect what Henry left me, completely. Charlotte guided me through every step. We established a layered, irrevocable trust, shielded by independent legal safeguards and strict medical clauses. The trust required confirmation from 2 unaffiliated physicians before any authority could ever shift. No one, not even Brandon, could bypass it. We transferred everything: the investments, the properties, the assets Henry had quietly built. We wrapped them in legal walls Brandon wouldn't even know how to approach. When I signed the final papers, I didn't hesitate. My signature was steady, deliberate, like I was finally drawing the boundary I should have drawn years ago. When we finished, Charlotte smiled. Not the kind of smile that says it's over, but the kind that says you've arrived. I tucked the final documents into a folder and hid them in a place I knew well, a drawer beneath the cleaning supplies under the sink, behind the box of dishwasher soap no one ever touched. A few days later, Brandon called again. He sounded warmer this time, like he was trying to rewind our story. He asked if I'd like to come over for dinner, just the 2 of us. No pressure, no papers. "I just want to spend time with you," he said. I agreed. I let my silence fill the space between us. When I arrived at his house, the kitchen smelled of garlic and bread. The table was properly set this time, with real plates, real food. Brandon pulled out my chair, asked about my drive, and spoke about work, about the new fence he was building, about nothing that really mattered. But I noticed the papers stacked neatly on the side table. Not the same as before, but familiar. His fingers brushed them twice during the meal, as if waiting for the right moment. When he finally reached for them, his voice softened. He told me he'd spoken to a lawyer, a friend who specialized in elder care. "It's not binding," he said. "Just a simple arrangement to make things easier. Nothing official." He slid the papers toward me. Careful. Practiced. I didn't touch them. Instead, I reached into my bag and pulled out a folded document of my own. I placed it gently on top of his stack. Paper met paper, the sound quiet but final. He unfolded it. His eyes scanned quickly at first, then slowed. It was a formal notice of trust execution, fully protected, fully independent, fully untouchable. My signature sat cleanly at the bottom, a signature that meant I had chosen myself. I spoke calmly, my voice even. "I appreciate your concern, Brandon, I really do. But everything is already in place. My affairs are settled. Completely." He blinked, his jaw tightening for just a moment. "Did you talk to someone?" he asked, though the answer was already written in the silence between us. "Yes," I said. "Someone who knows what it means to plan, without pressure." The room grew still. His hand rested near the papers, but he didn't move them again. For the first time, I saw him not as my son, but as a man realizing his options had quietly disappeared. Charlotte stepped into the house just then, polite, steady. She smiled at Brandon and introduced herself. "We'll be leaving now," she said softly, as if she had always known the ending. I gathered my coat. I didn't look back. Outside, the wind pressed against my face. I exhaled slowly, not from exhaustion, but from release. I wasn't walking away wounded. I was walking away certain. The certainty I carried when I walked away from Brandon's house didn't dissolve when I stepped back into mine. It followed me through each quiet room, settled into my mornings, and reshaped the way I moved through my life. The next day, I realized I didn't want to keep living in that house, a house that had grown too large, too heavy with memories that no longer belonged to me. By the end of the month, I sold it. I packed my life into a few worn boxes Henry's photo, some recipe cards, a chipped blue kettle, and a small ceramic owl that used to guard the back porch. I didn't take much because I didn't need much anymore. I moved to a smaller house near the park, old, uneven. The kind of place that creaked when the wind shifted. It was perfect. It didn't ask me to be anyone. It didn't remind me of who I used to be. It gave me space to begin again. Not as a mother. Not as someone waiting to be invited back in, but simply as myself. I didn't tell Brandon where I moved. I didn't leave a forwarding address. I wasn't hiding. I just wasn't offering a door this time. Most mornings, I walked to the small public library on Main Street. It became a habit, then a comfort. The library wasn't busy. It rarely is in towns like this, but I found purpose there. I offered to help with the front desk on weekends, sorting returns and shelving paperbacks. It wasn't a job. It was a rhythm, a way to keep my hands occupied while the rest of me settled into the softness of a life with no one's expectations. That's where I met them. They came quietly, one by one. Women about my age, sometimes older, moving through the stacks like they were looking for something they'd lost a long time ago. They didn't arrive together, but somehow they belonged to each other. Helen, who used to run a diner with her husband until he passed. Margot, who walked with a cane she only used when she neared the door, as if she wanted to appear stronger than she felt. Claire, who always brought peppermint tea in a dented silver thermos, her late sister's initials carved into the lid. We didn't become friends all at once. It happened slowly, over quiet nods by the same shelves, over exchanged glances at the garden books, over the silent understanding that we were all, in some way, building new lives from the rubble of old ones. One Saturday, Margot asked if I would help revive the garden bed behind the library. I said yes before I even looked at it. The soil was dry and stubborn, hardened by winters of being left alone. It didn't matter. We dug into it anyway, our knees pressed into the dirt, our hands stained from pulling weeds and turning the earth. There was no small talk, no questions about family or the past. We didn't ask each other what brought us here. It wasn't necessary. We planted tomatoes, basil, lavender, and sunflowers just to be a little defiant. We called it the quiet corner, a place that didn't need permission to grow. In that garden, I found something I hadn't realized I'd been missing. I found the steadiness of mornings spent working alongside women who didn't need to explain themselves. We shared silence like it was sacred. We laughed, sometimes. But even our laughter was soft, never forced. I stopped checking my phone. I stopped waiting for Brandon to call. I stopped imagining what I would say if he did. There was no bitterness in that decision, no sharp edges, just a calm knowing that I didn't need to be stitched back into his story to feel whole in mine. Each day I folded my towels with care, wiped down my counters even when they were already clean, and watered the garden at the same hour, as if tending to it also meant tending to myself. The quiet no longer felt like absence. It felt like a place I had chosen. Sometimes I sat on the library's back steps with Claire, both of us watching the wind tug at the leaves, the sunflowers leaning toward the sky like they knew something we didn't. We didn't talk about our children. When we did, it was brief, like glancing at an old scar. We didn't linger there. What we shared wasn't grief, it was clarity. I wasn't building this life in protest. I wasn't building it to prove anything. I was building it because it was mine. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting. I was simply here rooted, steady, and fully belonging to myself. The garden behind the library continued to bloom, and with each passing day, I settled deeper into the quiet life I had built. I no longer checked for calls, no longer scanned faces in crowds, no longer waited for a knock on my door that might never come. I had made peace with the silence, and the silence had made peace with me. Then one morning, as the early autumn air curled around my porch, I noticed a familiar car parked at the curb. It was the same shade of silver I used to see in my driveway, the same dent near the rear wheel Brandon always meant to fix but never did. He sat behind the steering wheel, unmoving, his hands resting on his lap like he didn't know what to do with them. I didn't go out right away. I watched him from the kitchen window as I finished folding a dish towel, letting the distance stretch just a little longer. When I finally stepped outside, the breeze carried the faintest hint of dry leaves and the sharp promise of the coming cold. Brandon climbed out of the car slowly, not with the quick confidence I remembered, but with the hesitant steps of someone who wasn't sure if he would be welcomed. He didn't rush to speak. He didn't carry a folder this time, or a contract, or a carefully prepared explanation. Instead, he held a plain white envelope, worn soft at the edges from being folded and unfolded too many times. When our eyes met, he lowered his gaze, his voice rough around the edges. "I'm sorry. Mom, I was overwhelmed. I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought I was protecting you. But I see now I wasn't. I let other things get too loud." He paused, glancing at the envelope in his hand. "This isn't paperwork. It's just what I needed to say." He held it out to me, his palm open. But I didn't reach for it, not yet. The space between us held more than words could fix. He seemed to understand that. "I don't expect anything." He added, "I just wanted you to know I see it now. I see what it cost." The silence between us settled like soft earth. I sat down on the porch steps, just as I used to when he was little, when he would come home with skinned knees and stories too big for his age. I didn't sit close, but I didn't sit far. "I forgive you." "Brandon," I said, my voice steady, without hesitation. "But forgiveness isn't a key. Some doors, once closed, stay that way for a long time. If they ever open again, they don't swing wide. They creak. They hesitate." He nodded, his shoulders curving inward, accepting the boundary I had drawn. We sat there for a while, not as mother and son trying to mend something, but simply as two people who had finally run out of places to hide. When he stood to leave, he placed the envelope on the step beside me. He didn't ask me to read it. He didn't ask for anything else. "Thank you," he said softly, then walked back to his car. I didn't call after him. I didn't wave. I watched as he drove away, turning the corner and disappearing from view. I remained seated, unmoved, feeling neither grief nor victory, just a quiet certainty that I had finally come home to myself. Later that evening, I baked a small cake, just one layer, just for me. I set it on the kitchen table, lit a single candle, and watched the flame flicker in the still air. There was no applause, no song, no witness, and yet, it was enough. I closed my eyes, made no wish for anyone else, and gently blew out the candle. I didn't celebrate reclaiming anything. I simply honored the life I had chosen. Some stories don't need to be retold. Some ties don't need to be knotted again. I have learned that my worth is not something to be granted by another. It is not tethered to invitations, nor measured by the seats I am offered at someone else's table. My value does not live in the hands that welcome me. My dignity is not negotiable. It stands, whether seen or not. It breathes, whether named or not. It endures, whether claimed or not. And sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is to stand, turn, and walk through a door you closed yourself knowing you never needed anyone's permission to begin.